break. Anything which offers a resistance to heat loss is the thermal break. The steel of the window above the window is a perfect example of that. That is new build, and by design you are able to cancel out or compensate for that cold bridge by design, by being able to put that thermal break in between.
So back to this ethos of a design led. So once again, it reiterate how important it is to design out any, loss of heat in the structure, because you imagine if you had to go back in and do that retrospectively, just how much work and damage, and then we start having this conversation about cost versus benefit to that.
When it comes to design, this is the whole idea of design, is to pick up these little items, these individual points, to be compensated and thought about. Now, every time we do a design and we forget a junction, or we forget a connection point, potentially we're causing an issue because it's not being dealt with, or things aren't being compensated for. So in the design is very, very important. The thing to remember is every time you have to go back to do a job, it takes twice as long and twice the amount of money. Okay, so get it right first time in design. That's why it's important to get good design done in a methodical way and not rushed into.
Absolutely. And so that leads on to retrofit. And I start thinking about one of the issues that we discussed in terms of the retrofit that I'm looking at for my own personal house. And we talked about removing the patio door and then putting extra insulation in between the cavity wall, so that the heat that would be coming off the concrete lintel, we'll put an image up of this, would have to go round the shall we say, the barrier that we were forming. So you proposed quite a innovative solution there, and it points to the importance of being innovative with retrofit, but also how you have to be quite creative and think about that cost versus benefit.
Retrofits, even though we work and use the same principles, we do have to think about it in a different way. Retrofit is out the box thinking quite often. It will throw things up that you won't get in a new build. You can't cancel things and compensate things by design. In a retrofit, it's already there. All you can do is look at each individual connection point to which has got to be dealt with and come up with a solution for that one point or for that one object. So yes, things can be compensated for, but they have to be taken in a slightly different train of thought when it comes to retrofit. Be a little bit more flexible in your thinking when it comes to compensating for cold bridge, thermal bridge, because you can't do it by original design.
Excellent. Seeing if I want to change the image.
What's the
No. So yeah, we're just identifying, John, the importance that there may be compromises that you need to make in a retrofit when you come to looking at the amount of money that you might have to spend. Some I'm going to say quick hitters to people to think about is, for example, a letterbox. We've touched on cat flaps. I think we've spoke about cat flaps, and maybe just touch on some of these quite easy to see areas.
Yeah. Retrofit, when it comes to retrofit, as we say, it's an existing body, it's an existing build. We have to look at how we can compensate for or connection points. The thing to bear in mind is everything we do costs money. So if a particular issue arises that it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of money to compensate for. Is that worth doing? Is that going to affect the build or the finished product enough to warrant that amount of money and that amount of work? Quite often the answer is yes, but there are occasions when the answer will simply be no, because if you do it, the cost just will never be recovered in the benefits of the final build. When it comes to penetrations that are already existing, particularly things like cat flaps and letterboxes. When you replace a door with a retrofit, you wouldn't put a letterbox in, for example, unless it was purposely designed for a passive house. You can get them. Cat flaps, dog flaps even. There are now dog and cat flaps on the market which are passive certified. They are actually designed for a passive house. They work almost like an airlock with two different doors, whereas the animal will pass through. They are available, but if you were doing a retrofit, these little things need to be considered the same as you would do in a new house. The only difference is you can't design it in from the start. It has to be thought about in the whole process. Gibby.
John, so this leads me on to thinking about party walls. So if you're in a semi-detached or a terraced and you've done the external insulation, for example, you're not going to be able to affect that party wall. So actually creating an internal wall insulation, fabric first approach, you know, it could create a lot more invasion in terms of the property. So just sort of thinking about that and fleshing it out a little bit.
Party walls. When it comes to a retrofit, party walls are a reality, and that is something that you're quite likely to come across. Thing is, with a party wall, you're governed by regulations, what you can and can't do. Bearing in mind, anything you do to the wall will have to be done with permission of your next door neighbour. Also, quite often, joists and beams that go into a party wall are quite difficult to compensate for because you've got a wall the other side you can't touch. So this is one of the compromises. The retrofit to a point is about compromise, maximizing the efficiency of the build and minimizing the amount of work and effort to which you have to put in. And party walls come into that. So you are restricted. There is a compromise. You may have to put an internal insulation onto a party wall to gain benefits from that. But bearing in mind, with a party wall, it's not an external wall. A party wall actually has another property the other side, which in itself particularly isn't ever going to be as cold as it is outside, or unlikely to be. So a party wall, yes, it needs to be taken into consideration. There will be some form of compromise, but there are methods you can use to be able to compensate in some way, potentially with an internal insulation.
Yeah, there has been research done actually by Leeds Beckett, and it shows that the party walls, you don't lose quite as much heat through a party wall. And what we will do is we will talk about that within this course as well. But one of the things I just wanted to mention is, for example, if you had a concrete foundation, and we talked about using insulation on the floor, you might have to potentially then raise the door height. Or another alternative is, I believe there are products out there that have got very good U values, but you will pay a hell of a lot of money for them. So yeah, I just thought I'd mention that, and maybe we could talk about that a second.
Yeah, floor wall connections, concrete floors and wall connections in the existing build, a retrofit. This is a particular issue. If it's a concrete slab floor, we lose a lot of heat, potentially up to 30% of our heat through the floor. We'll have a nice warm house and have warm bodies and cold feet in the winter because of how the concrete, which is basically a fridge pulling the heat out of your building. There's one big thermal bridge. So therefore, it needs to be compensated for if at all possible. If we can raise door heights, we can put a really good insulation over the top. Quite often, it's not possible to do that. So we have to minimize the amount of height that we raise onto the floor. So there are many products out there, some of which are actually good structural floorboards, which with reasonably good thermal values, but you're not going to have to raise the door heights to achieve a basic standard. But they do come at a cost. And therefore, you have this is one of the compromises again. You can only work with what you've got. You can make the best situation of the existing build that you've got. But if you do get an insulation on the floor, you can take it to the walls. And if you do an internal retrofit, you can take the insulation down onto that. So you can pretty much cancel out or compensate for the maximum amount possible for that cold bridge on the floor wall connection.
Excellent.